Now to the main stories. Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has extended his condolences to the U.S. governor and the people on the passing of former President Jimmy Carter, who died at 100. President Tinubu praised Carter's legacy, saying he showed how to remain relevant and impactful after leaving office. According to Tinubu, Carter was a beacon of service to humanity, dedicating his post-presidency to peace, democracy, and eradicating tropical diseases. President Tinubu fondly recalled Carter's contributions to Nigeria, particularly his efforts to eradicate guinea worm disease and river blindness. He also reflected on Carter's historic 1978 visit to Nigeria, which marked a pivotal moment in U.S.-Africa relations. Carter rose from a peanut farmer to become president in 1977 before being forced out of the White House after just one four-year term when Ronald Reagan stormed to victory in the next election. Now, after leaving the White House with low approval ratings, his reputation was restored through humanitarian work, which earned him the Nobel Peace Prize. James L. Carter Jr. was born on the 1st of October 1927 in the small town of Plains, Georgia, the eldest of four children.
This is a sad day, but it brings back an incredible amount of good memories. Today, America and the world, in my view, lost a remarkable leader. I think that what Jimmy Carter is an example of is just simple decency. Simple decency. And I think that's what the rest of the world looks to America for. The rest of the world looks to us. And he was worth looking to. Today's world, some look at Jimmy Carter and see a man of a bygone era. With honesty and character, faith and humility, it mattered. But I don't believe it's a bygone era. I see a man not only of our times, but for all times. Someone who embodied the most fundamental human values we can never let slip away. Although sometimes...
Still on Carter's death, to further discuss this, I am joined now by Ejike, Okpa, Global Affairs Analyst. Thank you so much, Ejike, for joining us.
Thank you for having me early in the morning. It's 5 a.m. my time in Dallas.
Good afternoon to you from over here. Now, Ejike, I mean, it's a global affair, and as a global affairs analyst, how do you assess Jimmy Carter's legacy on the world stage, particularly in terms of his commitment to human rights, to democracy, and to conflict resolution in general?
Thank you for such a question. Jimmy Carter has and was the kind of president that I've always liked, because when he left office, he remained relevant. He didn't get so much into the politics like we have former presidents do now. And he traveled the world, and part of it was, to spread the value of democracy and commit to things like you say, guinea worm, and so many other things that former American president never did. And he was one person that in 1978, I think he visited Nigeria, and he kept coming back to Nigeria. I think even after the World Cup in 1994, there was something, he came in and he went to Abakaliki, and, part of a medical mission on this public health issue. And then in America, he was committed to building homes. Habitat for Humanity was a program that it was strongly identified with him, and that was going into poor neighborhoods and participating and in actually building homes, because apart from being a farmer, he was also a carpenter. He made chairs. So, I've always liked him for that, and I was fortunate to meet him. But I will show you on the screen, I happen to be one person that has a paperweight that has a signature on it, and when I went to the center in Georgia. So I have that liking to him because he never played whether it was, of course he's a Democrat, but he saw things from the humanistic point of view, and he made himself available. So he died at the age of 100 plus, and no other American former president has ever made that mark, and that's remarkable. So he was very relevant up until a few years ago when, of course, the wife, got sick and passed, and himself, when he reached that age of 90-something, most people are not able to physically be available.
Right. Speaking of lessons from his successes and failures, now we know that Jimmy Carter's presidency was marked by significant foreign policy challenges that included the Iran hostage crisis and, of course, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. How do you think that his experiences during this period that I mentioned shaped his approach to international relations that we so speak of today?
Well, when you're in office, you're in the public eye, and everything you do becomes, a critical things to be looked upon and comment for against. So, the Afghan and it was a big mark on him, and because of how that thing turned out was why Reagan came in 1980 and beat him, and since then he went into retirement, he left office, but he remained relevant. So, no president is going to go without, the pluses and minuses of that office. But Jimmy Carter, I wouldn't say he lost, he didn't win the second term, but most presidents served the one term, but he was gracious in, losing, and then he still was very relevant. And that has left a mark, has left something for most people to say, hey, I would like to be like Jimmy Carter. But sometimes when you say it and you're a Democrat, or a Republican, people look at you really. But that is by the way now. He's gone, and his legacy will live forever. And the students of politics and history are not going to go back and look at his presidential papers, look at life in the White House and life after White House, and begin to write their own, stories or theories about what he did right and what he did wrong.
Right. Before I ask my third question, I see that you were trying to show us something, an award perhaps. What was that about, and how's that related to Jimmy Carter? If we can see it again, if you don't mind.
Well, it's a paperweight. It's a paperweight that has the presidential seal, and then his signature carved on it. This was when I went to the Carter Center in Georgia, and I happened to stumble onto him and meet him at the center, which normally is not typical. And I mentioned to him I'm from Nigeria, and that I had just finished high school when he came to Nigeria in 1978. And he was, oh, really? And then asked me, what tribe? I say I'm Igbo and all that other stuff. And then he looked around and said, oh, it's nice to meet you. And then he handed me the paperweight. And I was like, oh, my God, so here I am. It's on my desk. I cherish the fact that I met him purely by accident. And, that memory has lived on. And, talking about his influence, most people probably may not know, Jimmy Carter is credited to have influenced Obasanjo to leave Dodan Barracks, back then they didn't call that name, now they say Aso Rock. But he was credited as being responsible in influencing Obasanjo to leave office in 1979. So Obasanjo had met him, or Obasanjo came to the White House in 1977, and then he reciprocated by hosting Obasanjo in 1978. So, typically now they would not, American president would not receive military head of state, but he did it. And that's why that relationship was, formed. Andrew Young, was the African-American gentleman who was a U.S. ambassador to UN. And he also has some role in that, and that, formed the relationship that Obasanjo has with Andrew Young. If you remember in 1999, when Obasanjo became president-elect, I met Obasanjo in Georgia, March of 1999 as president-elect, and I attended his inauguration May 1999. And what is his name? Andrew Young was there because of that relationship was started about 20-something years ago.
Right.
So if there's any former American president that has visited Nigeria and had that interest in Nigeria, it was Jimmy Carter. And Obasanjo and him became very close because of the relationship, through Andrew Young.
Okay, Ejike, I'm glad you mentioned that he was actually instrumental to Obasanjo's handing over in 1979, because not a lot of Africans know about that. But we have to move on very quickly. So my final question to you before we let you go. As the first U.S. president to prioritize human rights as a central tenet of American foreign policy, Jimmy Carter's influence can still be seen in, contemporary global affairs. What impact do you think that his legacy will continue to have on U.S. foreign policy as well as international relations in the years to come?
Well, I mean, there's no time limit on that because, again, what do people look for? People want peace. People want democracy. People want successful transition of power. And if there's anybody who's supposed to get that credit, it's Jimmy Carter because he did it with military heads of states. He went to countries, when he was president and after that, most American president. I think he visited more countries than any other, president in office or former president. And what did he do? Either he went in for election integrity or election assessment. Whether those things led to successful elections in the country that was visited is up in the air for anybody to, give a plus or minus. But he was one person who was willing to show up, when needed, and he made his comments and offered his assistance. And if that led to, a positive outcome, he gets the credit. If he doesn't, again, he gets the credit. But oftentimes a visit doesn't mean, the country visited is going to be successful. It's up to the country that, received him to see what he said and see how they can, import some values in order to help their own local issues.
Right. Okay. Global Affairs Analyst Ejike Okpa, thank you so much for joining us. And we can very well see the impact that Jimmy Carter has had, not just on the U.S., but also on African countries as well. Thank you for joining us to discuss his life and time.
Thank you for having me and keep me awake every day.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.